Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with embodiment specialists from around the world. I'm your host, Mark Walsh. So I'm joined today by Matt Hill. So Matt is a Systema instructor. I've been hearing many good things about. Systema is a Russian martial art. He's going to tell us what that is, no doubt. He has a background in Aikido. He was in the parachute regiment, which means that he's far more badass than his mild-mannered British voice may sound like on the podcast. Knowing those guys, extensive background in martial arts and all sorts of interesting things. Been really looking forward to this, Matt. Welcome.
Thank you, Mark. Likewise.
So let's dive in. How did you get interested in the body?
Do you know, even before I knew what they were, I was interested in martial arts. I was the kid that, kind of ran around the woods and pretended to be Robin Hood and King Arthur and the kind of the European British martial artists. Before I kind of came across Bruce Lee and those guys, and then I grew up in that era. I was born in '73, so I grew up in the '70s. And so grew up watching David Carradine doing his stuff on Kung Fu and Bruce Lee and just thinking, what on earth is that, And then when I looked into it a bit deeper during the 80s, realized that they actually teach that kind of stuff. And I just thought, that's me, And then as you start to get into martial arts, I think most people join it for the physicality or out of fear. Most people are scared of something if they join a martial art. I'm not sure if it was that for me or I just was drawn to it. It was innately me. I had a physicality. I loved physical things. And I think every young boy wants to be strong, wants to protect people and, himself. So I guess that there was always an innate desire to do physical bodily things. And then as I started to understand the martial arts and delve a bit deeper, I realized there was so much more to it going on than kind of what's on the surface, and the internal side, the psychological side, the real things that matter, the dealing with the things that matter rather than the physical technique.
Great. So I hope today we'll have time to look at martial arts, also the health side, the psychological side, the full kind of spectrum there. And we have Aikido in common, don't we? I've actually been to Aikido seminars about 10 years ago when you were more on the Aikido side. You trained in Awama. We also had Miles Kessler on here, who was an
Okay, great. How is he?
He's great. He's in Tel Aviv. He's got a kid. He does piecework there, doing some really creative, fun Aikido. But you're in, that's a very traditional kind of approach to Aikido, isn't it, at Awamaru?
Very, very. One of the, I think even when I was there, which was, Miles was kind of one of my mentors, really. I think it was then one of the only very traditional dojos left in Japan where you were kind of there to serve the teacher as a kind of a manservant, if you like, or they call it an otomo. And through very traditionally through that feeling of service or through that act of service, you receive the teachings, from him, and living with him day in day out, and just watching how he does everything is how you really like any apprenticeship, I suppose, like an apprentice black, the old apprenticeships, an apprentice knight. You kind of you learn most from living with the person day to day, seeing how they approach and deal with situations, not just how they are that hour on the mat,
Yeah, now in this apprenticeship system, which, was part of Western culture as well, I really value, I had that with Aikido teachers. I would carry their bags and follow them around. And, I used to joke, kind of watch how they tie their shoelaces as much as anything, as well as the 1 or 2 hours I'd train with them every day. And I certainly got a lot from that, both in terms of observing people's being as a teacher, but also the service, as a sort of egoic young man, putting myself at the center, never had kids, never sort of really been in service to anything. And then actually going, okay, I want to be so tuned into this guy that I'll know he wants a cup of tea before he knows it. Like that real sort of being in service to another human being, I think is maybe part of that as well.
I think, and there's obviously a very martial crossover there, that you're aware of the triggers, things that are going on, people's feelings, emotions, you're sensitive to that. And you can feel when things are starting to happen, and in that instance, it's a very good thing where you try and have what he needs before he asks for it, like if we're in the garden and you can see where a job he's fixing is going, or a plant he's cutting or whatever, and you try and have the cutters ready before he asks for them. But then that also is the crossover to seeing how people are responding to situations and trying to be a step ahead in the OODA loop of where something is going, hopefully to de-escalate it.
Yeah. So people might not think of the martial arts, in this way of sort of sensitivity and being tuned into people. But, that's kind of most advanced martial artist understanding that I've spoken to is more about that and less about the sort of the kicks or the punches or whatever. Yeah.
I mean, it's the best self-defense, isn't it? It's being able to sidestep something before it even becomes a problem.
So you had this, and, Wama, as I understand it, is almost like a kind of a martial arts school from a movie, really old school and traditional, and, how people might imagine a Japanese martial arts school, though they don't often exist that way anymore. So you did that, and you were there for a good couple of years, I think, right?
Yeah, so I was there for 2 years, and it was quite unusual, to most people came and actually lived in the dojo for a couple of weeks, and there's some, because most people have got families and jobs, of course, and so most people came for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, or maybe 6 months max, and then I had to go home, or or if they were like someone like Miles, really dedicated, they kind of, I think Miles did about a year in the dojo, and then he kind of to continue, he got a place and lived outside, and so there was that option too, but yeah, 2 years to live as a live-in Anuchideshi was rare, and maybe you've got to be a bit odd to do that.
Were you completely institutionalized? I heard they don't let you do more than 2 years, I think now. I'm not sure if they had the rule back then.
No, I don't think they did, and that's probably a sensible rule, because I think you can be, because it's a small goldfish bowl, and I had some big adjustment problems when I got back, and I'll come on to that now. But yeah, it was very much like the movies. We mentioned Kung Fu with the temple and the cleaning and that kind of thing. It was exactly what I wanted. At 19 years of old, as a young boy, or young man maybe. Everyone there was passionate, focused, and there was as much training as you wanted, and with the best guys in the world at what I wanted to do. And certainly I thought, and yeah, it was intense, rewarding, forming.
Because we have people that listen to this show from yoga and dance therapy and sort of all sorts of backgrounds, it's, I really want to reveal some of these facets of martial arts, like even things like cleaning. It's integral to Japanese martial arts. People might not realize that, to clean the dojo.
And, then when I joined the army, and there too, cleaning is a huge part of being a soldier. And, and I think you over time, you realize that it's not just the outside you're cleaning, it's the inside, of course. And, the humility, the attention to detail, aside from, the physical things that have to, things have to be cleaned, and, maybe the Japanese take it to a degree that other cultures don't. But yeah, it was very much all entwined, and the cleaning was taken as seriously as the training.
And there's a way in which those environments, because I've been in similar ones, are very ordered, and they kind of make sense, don't they? Mm-hmm. It's like I was with Pietro, who was a Polish guy I was JiuJitsu with in Birmingham, actually, in an Aikido school, kind of quite traditional one. And we were kind of, our lives are quite complicated now. And we were sort of harking back to the simplicity of this sort of ordered, structured life where you just had to deal with the sensei and the technique and the cleaning. And it was actually sort of much easier than like we do now, running businesses and planning products and wives and children, perhaps, and all these sort of things.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a simplicity there, isn't it? And, but, that said, there's just as much of a maelstrom of emotions and complications in a small group of people living together, of course, ask any monk, I guess, as there is in everyday life. But yeah, there was a clarity of purpose and a singularity of purpose that you can always hold on to, I think, for sure. Yeah.
So you did that, and then you had a little bit of trouble sort of coming out of that. And I'd be curious to hear about that, just because I think that's a fairly unique tale. And also I want to hear about the British Army in terms of, you the parachute regiment, fairly hardcore group of people. I've had family in the military. They have the paras have a certain reputation as well. How was that?
Yeah. So coming out of it, I think staying there for 2 years, you inevitably become a big fish in a small pond. Being the kind of the guy that's been there the longest, you do the translation and you do, the day-to-day stuff. You welcome people in, you show them how things are done, so you've got a position that you hold there by default of being there the longest. And obviously you build a skill on the mat too. So you become quite a big fish in a small pond. But also, I think I was determined to do it well and to do it to the best of my ability. And as I saw it at that age, I don't know whether I consciously felt this, but I kind of intuitively tried to become as Japanese as I could in my approach, in my, how I was, how I spoke, how I dealt with things. And so I kind of lost myself a little bit, I think, to become what I thought they wanted me to be. And that's no disparaging on the teacher or the other people there. It's just how I saw was the best way to kind of get ahead, do my best. And to an extent it worked. I was the first guy that he took away as an Otomo in about the first Western guy in about 15 years. So when he went abroad to teach, he took me with him, and I got on very well. But when I came back and tried to adjust to British society, I really struggled for a number of reasons. That was one of them. I didn't really know who I was. I had a lot of confidence in that environment, but coming out of that, my confidence seemed to vanish. When I came back, my aim was to teach Aikido professionally, to be a full-time teacher, and my teacher encouraged me in that, and he was very supportive and very enthusiastic, and very you'll do a great job, you'll be a great teacher, and you'll have a great club, and I found it really difficult, and I think I found it really difficult to relate to people. I was good at Aikido, I could teach that and I could demonstrate it and I could do it. But in terms of being a teacher, the way the Japanese teach is very different, of course, to the way that we teach. And, their approach to training over there is very different to an average British person's approach to training, neither right nor wrong. And I think at that age, although I could do it, I didn't have enough life experience, in my mind, looking back now, to be what people look for in a martial arts teacher. And so, I think a combination of all those things made me really look hard at what I was going to do. Could I make it as a martial arts teacher? Or did I just want to go back and live in Japan and do something like, Miles did, live there for longer or forever? Or did I want to do something completely different? And I didn't know. And so I tried it for about 2 years in the UK and kind of did okay. I got a club going in a couple of places and ran it, and it was enough to train, never anywhere near enough to make a living out of it.
Very hard in the UK. Yeah, very hard, isn't it?
So I worked as a greenkeeper for a while, and loved that. The freedom of getting out and taught in the evenings and on weekends. And then after about 2 years, I went back to Japan to do some soul searching and figure out what was I going to do. Was I going to live there? Was I going to really come back and make a go of it? And there was an expectation to do that from the sensei. Or was I going to do something completely different? And I'm quite a deep thinker. I don't make knee-jerk decisions and reactions. And I'd thought, for about 2 years, and I thought I'll give myself 6 months to figure it out. And 5 months and 2 weeks later, I still, this is in Japan, still was not really any wiser, although I'd gone down the road of a few options. And then this guy turned up, and he was an Australian guy called Warwick Stacey. And I welcomed him in, took him to meet Sensei, and he gave him a gift. And as we were walking back down the path, I said, so you've got a bit of a British accent. And he said, yeah, I spent 8 years in the UK. I said, oh, whereabouts? And he said, Aldershot. I said, the home of the Paras. And he said, yeah, that's right, the home of the British Army. And I knew nothing about the army, really. I didn't really, apart from granddads who were in the war, I didn't have any, and an uncle who was in Remy, but I didn't have any really knowledge or desire to join the army. And so a couple of nights later, we were sat outside after training, drinking some water. And I said to him, so you're in the Paras? And he said, yeah, I spent 5 years in the Paras and 3 years in the SAS. And as soon as he said it, I thought, that's what I'm going to do. And I can remember it now as being the oddest feeling. And I think there's a couple of, maybe on a hand, if people think back, there's some singular moments, crossroad, road changes in your life. And it came completely out of the blue. And I can remember it now as clear as day, just the certainty that was what I was going to do, after all that searching. So he coached me for 2 weeks intensely. And then he made a call to someone he knew to arrange the first interview for me to go forwards. And then within less than 6 months of getting back from Japan, that time I was starting at Sandhurst.
Wow. Okay. So I want to draw out a few things there because I think it'd be interesting to people listening. One is this taking on of the sort of culture of your art. I had an Aikido teacher who would literally speak as a Yorkshireman who would speak in a sort of fake Japanese accent at times, Yeah. And, that's really, and I've seen that in other arts too, not just with Japanese, it might be Chinese, it might be Indian with yogis, this taking on of the kind of culture and then going after that, well, who am I? And then there's also to draw out, the idea that you can be good at an art, but not know necessarily how to teach it or run a business from it.
Yeah.
There's a whole other set of skills there. So you decided to Sandhurst, British military. I mean, that couldn't be more British. I mean, my uncle went through there, and it's super, super kind of old school British, isn't it? And there's an entire another kind of cultural indoctrination process there.
Oh, I mean, a couple of things. Yeah, because I'd had a place to go to university. I did my A-levels, and then I was going to go to university and do PE and geography, and I kind of postponed and then ultimately indefinitely postponed doing that to go to Japan. So I'd never had that experience of going away and boarding with another group of like people and halls and all that sort of thing. So that was all new to me. And Sandhurst, I'd say maybe even now it's one of the last bastions of kind of old Britain, with the kind of maybe you can a kind of a class system and there you mixed with, everyone knows royalty and earls and dukes and from all over the world, Prince of Bahrain and people like that. So it was a real, and I came from a comprehensive school.
My uncle had to learn how to sort of eat with different knives and forks and things. It wasn't just sort of running around with a log on your shoulder. He said he had to learn kind of dinner table etiquette and stuff.
Oh, I did. They put me on a course. You do the interviews for Sandhurst, and it's like a 3-stage interview. It's like what you think of a normal interview at a careers office. Then you do a 2-day residential, then a 3-day residential. And another 2-day residential with the arm that's going to sponsor you. So it's a total of 3, 4, 5, 7 and a bit days of interview, and they test you across your spectrum. And then you either get a straight no, a straight pass, or a qualified pass. And I got a qualified pass. So I had to do a 3-month course pre-Sandhurst it was called a cultural broadening course. They thought my cultural kind of experience was quite narrow. So I did 3 months of being taken out around Europe to art galleries, dined in big country houses and things. And, lots of useful stuff too, like fitness and drill and, work on your English and your maths. And really they kind of looked at where your gaps were and just kind of filled them up a bit to a level to give you a better chance of passing Sandhurst, I guess. But what a course at Her Majesty's expense. I mean, I'd still say it's maybe the best 3 months I ever did in the army.
Yeah, it sounds fun. And in terms of the relationship to the body in the military then, so, on the one hand, there's this emphasis on fitness, obviously, like any kind of military, there's the drill, and then there's also this slightly sort of uptight Britishness that you see in the kind of officer class. It's, what would you say is a kind of British military relationship to the body?
I think I talk about a lot with people is kind of posture. It's one of the 4 principles of sistema, posture, an understanding of your posture and how it affects everything else, your psychology, your physiology, your movement. And I often give the example that we're not talking posture like army posture. We're talking, which is maybe got too much tension in it. to be functional in the sense I'm talking about in Systema. But people, change dramatically, nearly always for the better when they join the army. In terms of their self-awareness, they become much more aware of their shortcomings, both character, physically, of course, their ability to deal with authority, with peers, as a team, and through that self-awareness, their self-confidence, their sense of self-discovery. And these are things you don't hear talked about much, but it really does change people for the better. It almost overwhelmingly, in my experience, obviously you get coming out of the other end some people that struggle to fit back into life afterwards, and you obviously get people who become traumatized by some of the very difficult things they face and go through. But certainly in the formative process of becoming a soldier, their understanding of themselves and their confidence to meet new challenges and overcome them. I was a platoon commander for recruits for a couple of years in Catterick, and every 6 months you'd have 60 kids that came in wanting to be paras, and they'd all kind of, it was funny because it would always be 60 different people, but they'd all kind of settle into groups, the same kinds of groups of types of people, and there'd always be a number that have got that tough, brittle exterior of a kind of a bolshiness, a reaction to authority, a reaction to being told to do something. And within 2 days, they'd be knocking on the door saying, my girlfriend's missing me, I need to go home, or, my mum can't cope without me, or green's not my colour. But none of those would be the reasons. The reason is that they, for the first time, they had to care about failure, because they weren't allowed not to care about attempting something and failing it. They couldn't just say, not really bothered about school or exams or anything like that. They had to care, and they didn't want to expose or open themselves to it. And luckily in the army, they'd signed to say for 6 weeks they were gonna be there and stay there. And so you could say to them, look, your room's been rented out at home, you're here for 6 weeks, let's make the best of it, let's make the most of it. And almost invariably they would come through that phase and that stage, and they'd soften a bit, become more resilient and confident in themselves. And by the end of it, give you a sincere handshake and say, thank you very much for not letting me go.
Nice. So I want to get onto Systema, because that's what you're kind of most known for at the moment, and it's quite an unusual thing. And there's so much juicy stuff here. We haven't talked about you kind of serving. I know you're in Northern Ireland. I'm sure there's all sorts of interesting experiences there. Anything you want to say to sort of wrap up on that front? Any other interesting experiences that you think might be interesting to people?
From the army days, you mean?
Yeah. In terms of, somewhere like Northern Ireland, pretty tense. I've taught out there. How was it to be as a soldier in that situation?
And obviously a huge excitement to go out and do the job that you've been trained to do with the guys you've been trained to do it with, and there's to test your skills, and also in a lot of ways, it was all the combination of all the things I grew up, wanting to do. When I was doing Northern Ireland, it was 99/2000. So it was just when things were starting to de-escalate. But because of that, things kicked off a fair bit. So it was a fairly busy time. And we were the Roermond Battalion. So we were the kind of the quick reaction force as a company. So we were based in Dramad, and there's a helipad. And when something kicked off somewhere, they came in, picked us up, and dropped us in there. So yeah, there was certainly enough for me to have felt that I'd put into practice the things I'd learned, without going too much further. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to talk about tension, no doubt. It was we go into Systema, so I imagine there was a certain amount of dealing with stress and tension.
Yeah, it's interesting looking back now, and I talk about that all the time, stress and tension, how it affects you. Looking back, there was an eagerness in the guys, and there's an optimism in paratroopers and I guess soldiers in general, but there's a kind of an offensive eagerness, optimism that's aggression when it needs to be, but just a desire to do what you're trained and ready to do. So I didn't see fear really much.
Interesting. Okay, so let's talk about Systema. That's your kind of main thing at the moment. You're running the Systema Academy in Wiltshire, is it?
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. And what is Systema for those that have never heard the word before?
Okay. There's short answers and long answers to that. The short answer is it's a Russian martial art, about 10 centuries old. So, although it's pretty new on the smorgasbord of martial arts, its roots go back a long way, a long time. For people that know the martial arts, it's it's a mix when you do some Google searches of big Russians hitting each other to stuff that looks very choreographed and planned, and people falling over too easy. To some guys that can do quite incredible things. So, like everything now, martial arts, there's so much access to so much of it. To the people that come to train with me, it's a way of approaching life. It's an attitude to life. So, the way that you approach not just a conflict situation. And I mean, for the everyday guy, how often are you in a violent confrontational situation? For most people, hardly ever in their lives.
Yep.
Which is a good thing. To, how you approach everyday movement, how you approach everyday interactions, everyday stress, your feelings, your emotions. And that's where, for me, the real value of Systema is. It's pretty unique in a martial art that I've come across, that it focuses on the function and health of your body and your psyche first, and then your combat effectiveness.
Well, maybe let's follow that lead then in terms of the kind of health side of it, because I think that's interesting to everyone. And then sort of martial arts side of it, which is interesting to the martial arts geeks like me, but maybe not everyone. So what's the health basis of this Russian system then?
So there's 4 principles of Systema. It's again a little bit different in its approach to some other martial arts, in that it doesn't work on a technique-based approach to teaching. It's a principle-based approach. And the 4 principles are breathing, movement, relaxation, and posture. Movement, it's a natural movement-based approach rather than a stance or postural or a practiced technique-based approach. They're not martial arty things. When you think about breathing, when you think about movement, when you think about posture, when you think about relaxation, that you wouldn't automatically think martial arts. You could almost think anything really, and certainly health comes from that.
If I'm Matt, sometimes when people are listening to the podcast, we ask them just to kind of notice what they're doing or to be aware rather than just consuming the podcast. And it's like there are 4 things that anyone right now listening to this could just check in with, right? Like, how's my breathing? How am I moving? How's my posture? How relaxed am I? That's universal, whether you're in the middle of a business meeting, whether you're walking down the street, they're things we can all pay attention to.
Yeah. You check, can you breathe naturally? And that's not as silly a thing as most people think. For most people, breathing is as automatic as blinking or digesting. But it's when you start to learn a little bit about it, and especially under stress, so psychological stress, physical stress, just movement, just doing a push-up, for example. Notice your breathing when you do a push-up. How much does it change? So when you learn to be adaptable and flexible in your breathing to achieve the optimum internal state, things really start to change and quickly. So really, Systema uses those 4 principles to check your function as a human being almost. It firstly checks you for good function. Can you stand properly? Can you squat properly? Can you get down to the floor and back up again? Can you walk? Can you run properly? Without restrictions to your movement, to your breathing. And then through that, you'll repair the dysfunction as much as you can, and that takes time. Of course, it's not an overnight fix. And then from that, when you can breathe properly, when you can move properly, you'll start to stress those things, and then put them into, combat scenarios. And that's, even if you're not really interested in learning to defend yourself, there's a real utility in that, because, that's maybe one of the most stressful things we can be in. And if you can know yourself in those circumstances and still manage yourself under those very intense, very stressful circumstances, then, Kipling says, you'll be a man, my son. If you can control your emotions, your thoughts, your movement, stay free under very intense circumstances, then, it really gives you a confidence to move through life freely, I think.
Yeah, I first came across Systema 10 years ago. I went to a seminar in Cambridge. I happened to be in town, and I was struck by how free it was. I was struck by, I'd done traditional martial arts, particularly Aikido, which have forms and structure, and kata, you do this, I do that, you attack me this way, I respond this way. And even in, sparring as a set of rules. But this was, I loved how creative it was. I loved how fluid it was. I loved how natural it was. All the movements, there wasn't prescribed. It felt kind of like free form jazz martial arts after playing scales for years.
And of course, it's too free for some people too. Hey, everything's got its, not everything's for everyone. But that's what really attracted me. First that how it healed me, and then the ability to be a martial artist. Yeah. The freedom to, it kind of, the way it works is through embodying those 4 principles, it kind of, you plant a seed inside, and that seed kind of grows out through you and suffuses your response, your movement, your reaction. So Systema is yours, really. It shouldn't be a carbon copy of your teacher or someone else. And so you get to be very creative. And, those moments where you do something and it was absolutely right for that moment and beautiful, but you don't feel the need to have to recreate it to show it again. It just, in that moment, it was spot on. And those moments are wonderful,
Yeah, something in Aikido, you get kind of 1 throw a year. One of my teachers always used to joke about. It was actually a half decent, because the concept of Takamushi is there in Aikido, right? But it's not usually developed or so stressed in the same way. With Systema, I've seen like training in water, training with sledgehammers. I've seen one of my students kind of is always kind of like beating on me and trying to get me to relax. So there's this process of kind of working through pressure and stress to help each other relax more and more. There's this sort of noodly quality to a lot of Systema people, isn't it? Where they're sort of really soft. They're not kind of how you might imagine a martial artist to be.
No, I've heard people say, the bendy Russians, and of course we all know that, softness isn't brittleness, or external hardness. It's soft is strong, soft is durable. And there's there's that kind of process in, like with iron, where you beat it and you hit it and you fold it and you beat it, and that process really deeply strengthens from the inside out. And so that's kind of a bit of the methodology in Systema too. Yeah.
And learning to be more and more relaxed, but in a fairly sort of, it could be done in a crude way, but I've seen it done fairly intelligently in terms of a training method. Like, I'm big on training methods and intelligent training methods. And it's like Systema relatively quickly gets people to that place of relaxation and creativity and calm under pressure.
Yeah. And I think some of it is showing people how to relax first. Most people don't even know what relaxation feels like, let alone how to induce it in themselves without the help of something, alcohol or, whatever, the kind of vices that relax you, without an external relaxant. So for most people, the ability to go from stress to relaxation consciously in a few moments or minutes is just not a tool set they've got, and they don't even know what they're searching for, really. So firstly, you show people what relaxation feels like, and it's very easy with breathing, guided breathing. And then you just keep, when you start moving or start interacting, grappling, wrestling, striking, whatever, you just remind them, okay, breathe, drop back to relaxation. And there's a conscious reminder to get back to that place. And for me, now that's what Systema is. It's a feeling. It's not it's certainly not even a set of principles, really. It's a feeling, and every moment I'm either in that feeling or I'm not. And if I'm not, I kind of realize that I've been pulled out of it and drop back to that feeling.
The feeling is one of relaxation, flow, creativity. Is that?
Yeah. Feeling relaxed, balanced, calm, stable. And I think that is a feeling is maybe the most accessible thing we've got at a time of high stress and pressure. If you can notice that you've changed, your feeling has changed, even when you haven't got access to conscious thought, really, in those moments, you get the spiraling of panic or the blind freeze that people get. If you can access a feeling and drop back to it to get to a functional state, I think that is maybe the most reliable and functional way to manage yourself under those extreme high stress moments and situations.
No, I think that's pretty transferable as well, isn't it? And as you say, there's talking about earlier when you're doing Aikido and Awama, then your confidence didn't carry across to the outside world.
Yeah,
I'm really obsessed in the yoga context, particularly about how do we get it off the mat? How do we transfer it across? And it seems like to me, like in Systema, people are doing it in pretty normal clothes. There isn't so much, I love the ritual and the discipline and the kind of special words and clothes and things like Aikido, but I also worry that holds it on the mat. And in a way, you look at Systema, it's kind of more normal. It's just people in maybe combat trousers and jumpers and T-shirts. And there isn't the same kind of ritualized, saying onigashimasu before class or anything like this. I wonder if that doesn't mean that it can transfer a little easier, particularly given how universal these principles are.
Yeah, I mean, that ties in a couple of things, really. Firstly, the combat trousers and things put me off a lot at first, because nothing is more off-putting to a professional soldier than, guys that dress up in combats and but that wasn't the reality. That was just an image, and a knee-jerk thing in my head. But what really appealed to me was the taking it off the mat, doing it outdoors in the woods, the forests, using the environment, because of course, that's where these things were born. These things weren't born in a dojo on a mat. They were born in the fields, in the forests, coming off ships in the water. They should. And of course, if ever you've got to use it, that's where you're going to use it.
I wanted to ask you about this because I often see beautiful videos of Systema and people are in the woods or they're in a lake or, there's this kind of, I know you like bushcraft, right? And there's this kind of connection with the natural world that might not be there in, say, I was in a dance studio in London a few weeks back and it was pretty sterile, beautiful wooden floor, a bar, mirrors, there was ballet people there as well as contemporary people, but it was so sterile, and I thought that's quite different from dancing out in the woods somewhere.
I've got a book coming out in mid-November called Living Systema, and it's about taking Systema out of the gym, because even Systema is practiced in a gym, for the majority of the time, although I do courses and things outside, but just for, if you only ran an outdoor course in Britain, you wouldn't have many students, I guess, so
you have a practical issue there.
Yeah, needs must. So, and the book's about how do you take it off the mat and put it into everyday life? How do you make every moment count, every second count? How do you train when you haven't got time to train or a space to train? How do you think about these things all the time? Without it being an obsessive thing. Just how do you notice things more? How do you bring it more into every moment? And so the book's kind of about that. But that was one of the key things that really pulled me in Systema. And I remember asking Vladimir on the first camp I went to in Canada in 2012.
One of the senior teachers, right, in Toronto.
Vladimir Vasiliev, yeah. So he's the guy probably responsible for the fact that most martial artists in the world have heard of Systema now. It's probably down to him. He's not the guy that brought it to the public consciousness and domain. That was Michal Ryuko, who still teaches in Moscow. But Vladimir emigrated to Canada 25 years ago. And, actually, it's down to his wife that most people know about it, because she's the marketing genius. And she's
PR guru. There's always one, isn't there? There's always a good lawyer or a PR guru or marketing guru,
Yeah. But when I met him, and I, he was in his 50s when I met him then, early 60s now, I think, or around there. And he moved like no one I'd really seen before. And I said, what kind of training do you do? How do you keep yourself in this shape? And he said, have you ever seen a tiger doing push-ups? And it was, I smiled, at the image, and then I thought deeper of it, and I thought it kind of made sense, and it's very much my paradigm of, the whole exercise in gyms on machines and things. And, it's, we're doing things human beings have never done, and it's all happened quite quick, and a very natural approach to living, moving, the whole idea of what exercise is about, what are you trying to achieve, I know that's a much deeper conversation than with the time we've got here.
Well, it's getting trendy again now, Matt. The whole free movement thing, there's a whole group that climb trees in parks in London now. Yeah. And we've got some free movement people coming on the show. We've got the Fighting Monkey people and a guy called Chandler Stevens. And, right. I'm really getting into it. A lot of my students are doing it. And they're fun, and they're coming back with all these great games from these different, Ido Patel or Fighting Monkey, whatever, and that sort of natural movement thing, which I think I first really saw in Sistema, now seems to be catching on as people realize, like, hey, maybe, the gyms aren't always the best idea, or this kind of artificial movement isn't the best idea.
Yeah. And I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Gyms have got a place for sure for very sports specific type stuff. Then the whole argument that, are we specific beings? Are we designed for specificity? We're quite generous. But that whole paradigm really interested me. And when I asked Vladimir that question, I said, how do you stay in shape? What do you do? And he said, you ever seen a tiger doing push-ups? And I kind of got it. But then there's a second part of it. And I was recounting that conversation to Martin Wheeler, who's another big guy in the Systema community. And he said, yeah, but the catch is you've got to be a tiger in every moment. I.e., you've got to bring it to everything you do. And, when you stand up, when you sit down, when you move, when you walk, they've all got to be those movements. You've got to be conscious in all those movements, and you've got to move that way all the time. And so, yeah, this more than anything I've ever done, I think, has given me the chance to manage not just my health, but my, and my well-being, but my skill improvement on a moment-to-moment basis.
Interesting. And, there's the health practices. I know some of the Systema people do like cold water dowsing and, some stuff that you just don't see in the Asian martial arts. Or I guess there's the old sitting under waterfalls thing, but it does seem to be this quite different cultural influence there. I work in Russia a lot. My partner's Ukrainian. I've never trained. Systema's not so well known out there, is it? But as I understand it was this kind of intelligence services that it was associated with for a while. Is that right?
That's it. Yeah, there's a bit of a misnomer that Systema was kept for the Spetsnaz and that kind of thing. And I asked them about it because I hosted Michal and Vladimir for a seminar a couple of years ago. And, you get to spend a bit of time with them, and we were talking. And I said, something's been, not quite sitting right, that, having spent a fair bit of time in the military and, in my whole 6 years in the army, I did 3 hours of hand-to-hand combat training.
It's very limited, isn't it, in terms of the training, yeah.
And 2 of those I taught myself.
Right.
And I said, my experience is you don't really do hand-to-hand combat in the armed forces. And Michael said, well, it depends on what part of the armed forces you're in. And they've got a thing called the SMERSH, which is their counterintelligence. And that's what Vladimir was in. And they're the guys that Michal trained. I mean, Michal was operational Spetsnaz at 14. I mean, he's quite a colourful history. His uncle trained him in Systema from the age of 5, and his uncle was a bodyguard to Stalin. Michael was operational at 14, very decorated, and, was the kind of the go-to guy in the Russian army for if someone thought they were handy, they said, we'll go and see Michael and see how handy you are. So, he when Soviet Union collapsed, and everything was allowed to come out again into their culture, he was the guy holding the Systema ball at the time, But he said it's the, and when he said that it was the counterintelligence guys, it all fell into place. The ability to manage your internal state, so the ability to walk through towns, cities, sit next to someone on a bus, follow them for 3-4 weeks, and then never know you were there. And then one day just bundle them into the back of a car. That doesn't take techniques and physical strength or, an aggression. That takes an ability to manage your internal state to a very high degree, to not give away signals, anxiety, tension, stress, and then the hand-to-hand stuff that, if you have to go wet with weapons, then you failed in the mission. And he said, I asked Michael as well, I said, how different is the systema you're teaching us to what your uncle was taught? And he said, you've got to what your uncle taught you. And he said it was a world apart. He said you've got to understand the world that these guys lived in and the things they did, And he said when they were sent away on an operation as counterintelligence, sort of post-war, to bring back someone, if they failed in the mission under Stalin, i.e. if they damaged the guy to an extent where he wasn't able to give them information, they were killed when they got back. If they were killed in the operation, their families were killed.
Wow.
Can you imagine that pressure?
Pretty horrible times to live under, for sure. Yeah, not a nice guy, not a nice system, for sure.
So it fell into place. Why Systema focuses so much on your management of your internal state, and how the hand-to-hand system kind of survived. Obviously, why it was there 10,000 years ago, but how it survived to modern day and in the extent that it has, it kind of all started to make sense to me then.
Interesting. And in that managing state, and you'll still see that in Russia, the management of emotion is considered very valuable response. Like I had a very difficult conversation with a couple of colleagues last night. I won't go into why, but I said to my wife beforehand, got any advice for me? I always listen to her. She's smart and wise. And she's like, keep the power, do not to respond, do not to be emotional, and it's a very Slavic point of view.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. I mean, obviously there's advantages and disadvantages to that as a point of view, but from her point of view, it was like, don't react. That was, she said, first of all, she said, listen and don't react. And I'm like, wow, that could be from Aikido or Systema, to listen to your opponent and to go into a reactive response. And she's had zero martial arts training, but that's just what she's intuited from, her own kind of background.
Very kind of old British too, the kind of
the non-reactivity. I see a lot of emphasis in embodiment world put on expression, which I think is really important to be able to, emotionally express and move fluidly. But then there's also this other side of being able to be restrained, and it might not be very fashionable. It might seem almost conservative to people, but I think there's really something in that as part of how we can deal with difficulties. And, I almost lost my cool last night, and I'm really glad I didn't say some of the hurtful things that almost came out of my mouth. I'd be in a worse situation today if I had done, last night.
Yeah.
But, okay, I wasn't perfect, but I didn't say that thing that went into my mind that would have not made that conversation be constructive for anyone. And I think that sort of self-restraint, that sort of self-regulation is in the military, in Britain, in martial arts, in Russia, it's kind of quite high, but it's highly thought of. But I think a lot of the embodiment community doesn't necessarily have that value anymore.
It's interesting. Yeah, the kind of freedom of speech, the freedom to say what you want when you want, I guess. But there's, in some ways, that, and I don't mean this disparagingly, that is a professional approach, isn't it? To be able to kind of, a professional is generally not too affected by emotion, and then or able to manage the emotion, I guess in some ways that's a definition of a professional.
Yeah, my colleagues and I at the end of the day said, you know what, we're having a disagreement, but we're all going to be teaching. We need to be professional. And we all had that standard of professionalism. We said, okay, for the good of the students, we're going to do this, this, and this. Because we were all able to, we're in that all in the frame of professionals. We're able to, hold things in that way. So what else from Systema? Because it's really fascinating. I mean, how you guys do exercise is really interesting, isn't it? Because it's not really exercise. Like when you were talking about this earlier, and I think it's worth making this explicit because it's beautifully weird. Like when you guys, as I understand it, my friend Shoshana was telling me, do a push-up or a leg raise or a pull-up. You're more interested in not being tense in that or not being reactive in that. Is that the case? So that's the training, right? Not the muscular training.
Yeah, and of course there's value in that too. You know, to get to to do a push-up is a basic given that you've got the strength to do a push-up, of course. But there's a different reason if we take a push-up, for example. But this applies to any kind of exercise or movement in Systema. We're looking for different things than you do in a gym. You know, we're certainly not looking for aesthetic quality, you know, the size of your muscles or anything like that, or even the ability to do 50 or a strength gain. Although it's a nice offshoot, but you know what you're looking for is different things. So you're looking to see if you know, can you move freely through your full range of motion? Have you got full range of motion? This comes back to the dysfunction thing. You know, it's not just a 3/4 push-up or a 3. You know, if you take a squat as an even better example, you know, most people struggle to keep their feet flat and squat much below the level at which they sit in a chair. To do the human deep squat, you know, bum on heels, feet flat, is beyond most Western people, most Western adults.
I do a good squatting Slav impression in a black Adidas tracksuit with a cap on. I learned that in Russia.
Brilliant.
Squatting's part of Slavic culture. Actually, you'll still see that, like on their estates. You'll see a bunch of guys squatting because they don't want to put their asses on the cold floor, smoking, drinking. Like squatting is just in the culture.
Yeah, and there's so much more going on there than just muscular exercise, of course, you know. So you're looking firstly for that. Can you move freely through your full range and easily? You know, is it an effort, or can you just, as a breeze, you know, like a toddler squats, just gets down and gets up? You know, that's not an exercise for them. It's just movement. You know, then, you know, can you breathe and move at the same time? Because if you can't breathe and move, you're going to struggle when it comes to, let alone the health implications of that, you know, the pressure build up in the body, you know, those things. If you can't breathe and move, you try ground wrestling for a while and you're really going to struggle.
Yeah, I've done that with JiuJitsu. It's just like, if you're not breathing, you're going to be gassed so quick.
Absolutely. Yeah. And someone new comes to something like JiuJitsu and, you know, they don't know how to measure their strength, and they, you know, don't know any of the techniques, and, you know, they're not breathing. And so, you know, lo and behold, 2 minutes later, they're just a mess on the floor. So, you know, so can you breathe and move through those positions? And then, you know, thirdly, are you locked up when you do a movement? You know, when you do a press up, are you locked into that movement, or have you got the flexibility to rotate to move your shoulders? You know, if someone here wants to check themselves, you know, if they can drop. Sorry, it's just my dog arriving. You know, drop down into a push-up position, and, you know, take about 10 seconds to drop down and back up, and see if you can roll and move your shoulders at the same time as you're doing a push-up. And you know, most people probably can't, because the muscular effort involved has locked up the body. So it's to have that freedom of movement in your body. And again, that just translates straight into health and tension.
Yeah.
Joint health.
And that's something, you know, even anyone listening to this, whether they're kind of, you know, sitting on the metro somewhere or walking or driving, it's like, okay, is there excess tension, right? Like, that's a question I ask myself through the day. I'm sitting, I'm maybe interviewing you, I'm talking to my wife, I'm, you know, disagreeing with my colleagues. And it's like, okay, do I need to tighten my jaw now? Does my belly need to be tense right now? Probably not, you know. Like, I don't know about you, but my experience is there's nearly always some tension which just doesn't need to be there for the actual thing that I'm doing.
Absolutely. And, you know, and that tension is running into, you know, life is putting tension into you all the time, you know, through your thoughts, through your interactions, through your movement, through your posture, through your position, you know, every moment, you know, through the things you're taking in, through your senses, tension's coming in. And, you know, if you can, it's such a great skill, you know, if you can be aware of that and just drop it out, so it just kind of falls through your body like a sieve and out through your feet, you've really got a valuable skill there to manage not just your physical health, but your mental and emotional health too. Because of course, you know, tension is emotion too.
Yeah, in terms of the, you know, the bodily reaction is what it is, right? You can't be emotionally tense and physically relaxed. This is just not two are two linked. They're two sides of the same
hold on
thing.
to.
Oh, you're making me wish there was a really good Systema club in Brighton, Matt. I wish you were local. I'd be there in a flash. Like, I feel like I've done my time of traditional martial arts and I like it still, but I love that creativity of it. I love the freedom of it, and this emphasis on like what's actually useful. You know, I say in Aikido, I used to talk about being a 6-degree black belt arsehole, a 6-dan arsehole, or in yoga, it's like someone can get their leg behind their head, but so what? This idea of just, why does that matter? And it seems to me an approach of Systema, which is sort of principles based, is more creative, more spontaneous, more individual expression, but also more transferable to everything else. That's kind of the conclusion I've got to with other things.
Yeah, I don't want to add anything to that.
Sorry, I summed that up too well. So is there anything else that's sort of unique about Systema that's a bit different, that maybe surprised you coming at it from the martial arts, or, that's a little bit like, oh, that's unusual?
All of it initially, their approach to exercise that you've spoken about, some of the strange kind of breathing exercises, breathing and walking, things that, initially you think, what? Using rather than using weights, pushing moving someone else's body around, so many things in the exercises and the approach to training, just getting hit. Most martial arts, you don't, like Aikido, I was used to having a Nikkyo put on me that would bring tears to your eyes. Or,
that's a wrist lock for those that are listening.
So, or, the arm bars and kind of joint locks and things. But I boxed a bit. But it was the first time that someone had taught me how to remove the effects of a hit from the body, from the psyche. They talk about cleaning a lot. In fact, maybe I was going to say one thing that's pretty unique. It's a lot of people refer to Systema as a cleaning system.
Interesting.
In terms of the tension, the dirt, you really get to kind of dislike tension in Systema, and stressful people, stressful situations, stressful things. Obviously you learn to deal with it, and some things, you can't run away from or move away from. You've just got to deal with it. Your children, or your partner, or your job, or you can't just throw your hands up and walk out, and you need tools to deal with it. But I think that whole aspect of cleaning yourself, cleaning your thoughts, cleaning your tension out of your body, cleaning your movement. And when I heard Vlad say, your movement's not clean, they were new concepts, new ideas, and I get it now. And when I don't move clean, I feel it. And sometimes when I try to move clean with certain things, I struggle. But I know what I'm looking for now. And so that idea of being clean.
Yeah, and I see that I go to the Bathhouse quite regularly in Moscow. There's a place called, I think it's pronounced Sardiny Bathhouse. It's a kind of posh bathhouse, a bit of luxury, and people are sweating. They're eating good food. They're swimming. Apparently in the women's side, they do prayers with holy water, and there's a whole sort of mental, spiritual, physical cleansing.
Yes,
that's quite an important thing. I mean, the Japanese have misogi, it's a similar concept, but it's a little bit strange to us, isn't it? And it's like, I also get what you mean about tension. Like, I've noticed the more I've kind of worked in doing more and more relaxed things, I dislike being on, say, an EasyJet flight full of agitated people. And I go, you know what? I'll tell my secretary, pay the extra £50. I want to go British Airways. And it's not because I'm being a snob. It's because I don't like the feeling of the tension.
Yeah.
Or I don't want to be in the supermarket. And I go to the shop where I know the guy and it's relaxed, rather than under the bright lights with the music in the supermarket, even though it's a bit cheaper at the supermarket, because I want to be relaxed when I'm doing my shopping. And I can cope with the supermarket. I can deal with it, but I don't want to. And that sort of increased sensitivity to the environments that stress you out and the relationships. One of the main reasons I get on well with my wife is just that we're relaxed with each other. And that doesn't sound like a big deal, but for me, that's like top of the list when it comes to marriage. We just deal with each other.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Go on.
And maybe the last thing I'd say on Systema is I'd always been a searcher, and of course I still am. And through the karate days, the Aikido days, the boxing days, the army days, there'd been something I felt I was kind of still hadn't quite found. And I think certainly where I am now, the thing that I was missing was that thing that gave you the tools to deal with the fear, the overwhelming fear that comes in a conflict situation, whether it's military or in the street or a pub. That kind of overwhelming moment, and when you don't want to just react in an uncontrolled way, in a berserk way. You want to be able to manage yourself in a professional, controlled, not frozen, stepping in if you need to, but being able to make those choices. And Systema gave me those tools.
Matt, you really strike me as a gent, and there's something about, like, most senior martial artists, like Miles, have the same thing. That's just kind of pleasant people who are respectful, and I see that more in the martial art community than I do, say, in the yoga community, if I'm honest. And I wonder if that's because there's something about the security of going, well, okay, most people are scared to fall over. I'm not. Most people are scared of a fight. It's like, I'm not. I don't want to be in that situation. If I was in that situation more than every few years, I'd actually worry about my life. But it's like, there's that security of, like, okay, if the worst thing to be happen for most people will be something like being hit. And I remember in my first Systema class, I had someone sitting on my chest while someone else choked me out or someone else punched me. And it was all very friendly, and they were lovely people, and we're all friends afterwards. But I thought, wow, if I can learn to be not scared in this situation, then it's like, how much easier is it to deal with the other things in life?
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. So, Matt, any last message for people before I ask you to say where people can find you? Any sort of last message about the body or about your experience?
Obviously, if people are interested in Systema, then we'll talk about where to find it now. But I think manage the moments. The breath is the quickest way into that. And if you can, manage the moments, you manage your life. And if you miss the moments, you miss your life. And I think if you can find a way, whatever your practice, and I know Embodiment is has got a number of fantastic practices and disciplines to do that. If you've got things that can bring your awareness to the moments, then you're well on your way to get in there, I think.
Well, Matt, this has been a pleasure. I kind of thought it would be, and it was really a joy. I'm sure we could talk for another couple of hours, but we've both got things to do. You're always welcome to visit. If you're in Brighton, give us a shout. If you have any seminars down here, then definitely let me know. And people can find you at matthill.co.uk, right?
That's correct, yeah.
You've got some books on there. I've had those recommended by students of mine who are kind of well read in the embodiment field. So that's, big recommendation. Anywhere else online people can find you?
Yeah, I've got a Pivot Share channel with over 50 different short videos of different Systema combat and Systema health practices that people can delve into and have a look at. And I've got another book coming out about how to take this stuff into everyday life.
Brilliant. I'll happily buy and review that. So let me know when that's out. Tag me when that's out. Yeah. Okay, Matt, this has been brilliant. Good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Real pleasure.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to get more. If you'd like to help us build the Embodied Tribe, leave a review on iTunes or share this on your social media. If you're interested in training globally, sign up to receive the newsletter at embodiedfacilitator.com. Until next time, welcome home to the body.